once, many years ago. I was 8 or so at the time, and every day I would walk home from my elementary school. My house was a few miles down the road, so my mother thought it would be safe enough for me to walk by myself. It was a few months into the school year when it started happening. A beat-up-looking Toyota would slow down enough for a couple of white guys that looked like they were in their mid to late 20s to follow me and yell insults at me. I was chubby back then, so they would call me fat and much more hurtful things. I'll always remember the driver. He looked to be the oldest of the bunch, with greasy blonde hair hanging down and partially covering his pimple-scarred face. They would follow me until I reached the gas station that was halfway along my journey home. Then they would speed off, laughing loudly. For the first couple of weeks, I didn't tell anyone, thinking that they would get tired of it. They didn't. A full month passed before I told my mother about it. She, of course, was rightly concerned about me and asked me how long it had been going on for. When I told her a month, she grew even more concerned. Her being a single mom, she couldn't pick me up from school because she was at work all day. So her solution was to send my older brother to meet me halfway, thinking this would deter them. It didn't. Another 4 months went by, with them continuing to follow me and throw insults at me. Then suddenly, it stopped. A whole month went by without them driving by, and we thought everything was safe again. We were wrong. Suddenly, out of the blue, I saw the old beat-up Toyota heading down the road towards me. Only the driver was in the car this time. He slowed down the car, flung open the passenger's door, and proceeded to yell at me for me to get into the car. I was so scared, I couldn't even speak. I just shook my head no and tried to walk faster. He continued to follow me, demanding that I get into his car. I'll never forget the look on his face as he yelled at me. It was so full of rage. We finally got to the gas station, and I made a break for it. I ran inside the gas station and up to the gas station attendant. I told him what was happening, and he let me hide behind the counter. The driver pulled into the gas station, hopped out of the car, and came in. He demanded that the gas station attendant tell him where I was, claiming I was his daughter and I had jumped out of his car. The gas station attendant glanced down at me, and I shook my head wildly, mouthing that I did not know this man. The gas station attendant said he didn't know who he was talking about and that he had to leave the store immediately. The driver began to yell wildly and started walking around the store looking for me. The gas station attendant said he was going to call the police if the man did not leave. The man turned to him and said something I'll never forget. "I'll get that bitch, one way or another." The driver stormed out of the gas station and left. I sat there on the floor crying for what felt like hours. The gas station attendant called the police and had them come over. When the police arrived, the attendant told them what had happened. A police officer knelt down beside me and asked me my side of the story. I told the officer everything, how him and a couple others had been following me for months, how they would follow me and insult me, how they suddenly stopped, and how he tried to get me into his car. I don't remember much afterwards, other than them calling my mother and her meeting at her house. They took my mother's statement and then left. After that, my mother changed her work hours in order to come get me every day. For years, I lived in fear that that man with the greasy hair and pimple-scarred face would eventually get me. So to the man who followed me for months, insulted me, and eventually tried to get me into his car, I'm not that scared little girl anymore. We better never meet. To start this off, a little about me. I'm 20 years old, a woman, and not completely ugly. So sometimes I get creepers, and it sucks. I work as a bagger and a cart pusher at a big grocery store chain. while simultaneously going to college full-time. You meet all sorts of interesting people at work, which is where this story takes place. A few months ago, I was doing my regularly assigned duty of pushing carts inside from the parking lot. It's pretty physically exhausting, especially in the summer, but it's a good workout. We have a little sidewalk island in the middle of the parking lot for people to walk up to the store without worrying about getting hit by cars. It's got a few benches, too, where you can find the occasional elderly customer resting. I'd picked up a run of about 5 small carts and was headed across the flat part of the sidewalk island when a man sitting on the bench called out to me. Customers calling out to me is nothing new. People have questions all the time, but this man didn't have a question. He proceeded to tell me how pretty my hair was and that it was such a nice contrast between red and black. Really, it's more like an awkwardly dyed auburn, but I digress. Normally, such a compliment doesn't bother me, but he immediately followed up with a bunch of weird questions about me, like where I was from and how long I had worked here and whatnot, all while I was in the parking lot with a bunch of carts that I needed to get inside because it was busy. I brushed off his questions as politely as I could, but he still followed me halfway back to the store. After I got inside, I glanced out to see that he had returned to the bench, which faces our front doors, and that he was staring at me. Weird, but it was a 5 p.m. weekday rush, so I didn't really have the brain power to question it beyond that at the time. Over the next 2 hours, every time I glanced out there, he was there, on the bench, staring at me. He hadn't bought anything and hadn't talked to anyone but me. At this point, I'm sort of freaking out, so I go to Robert, one of the other cart pushers. Robert is built like a building and generally intimidating to look at, but he's as gentle as can be. I ask him to please take over my cart duties until the weird dude goes away, which he agrees to. About 45 minutes pass before Robert tells me he can't see the guy anymore. I figure it must be safe to go outside now, right? Wrong. I get out to the first cart corral and begin collecting carts to pull in when the same guy from before comes out from behind a parked car and starts in on me. I'm alone in the parking lot and it's getting dark. He's angry. He wants to know why I've been staring at him this whole time. I'm staring? I'm staring. He insists he's been doing nothing wrong by just sitting there and is generally acting very threatening. He's got about 6 or so inches on me, and I have no doubt he could outrun me if I made a break back inside. He's advancing in on me. I'm backing up, panicking. I don't remember what I said to him, but I know I was trying to placate him and also to ask him to please leave me alone. It's about 8 p.m. at this point, so most customers have gone home. The parking lot is almost empty. Thankfully, I get saved. A middle-aged woman, another customer, comes up and asks what the trouble is. The guy takes a look at her, realizes he's outnumbered, and storms off for the hardware store next door. I thank the woman profusely, and we both go inside to talk to my manager about what happened. My manager says to her immediately if the guy comes back, she'll take care of it. Thankfully, the guy never came back. I don't know who he was or what he was after, but I'm so glad that woman decided to intervene. This past week, I've been house-sitting and dog-watching a family friend's house. This house is right next to the local hospital, and it has trails and gardens, perfect for dog walking. So, I go about my usual walkabout with the dog, and on my way back to the house, I see this guy walking in the middle of the road. This man was holding on what looked like 2 heavy bags, strung on his crutches. as he hobbled down the road. I look at him, and he looks visibly tired and out of breath. I walk up to him and ask him if he's okay. I know with how close he is to the hospital, maybe he was confused or delirious and trying to get help or something. He looks at me, and very hoarsely he says, "No," and then goes in on this story about how the ambulance was called for him because of him falling off a ladder and then having an asthma attack. However, he said that he had no way of getting home because of the ambulance, and that he didn't have enough for a cab to get back to Washington, D.C., about an hour away. So, my dumbass self decides to fall for this and feel bad about his situation and offer him a ride. You know, like a dumbass. He thanks me, and I tell him I have to put the dog back, and then I'll get my car. He waits at a nearby bench as I head on home to get my car ready. I get to my car and clean it out so it looks like I have nothing to steal, just in case he's faking. I grab a knife and put it in my driver's side door, then practice the clumsy movement of pulling out the knife and thrusting it into the other seat like an absolute dumbass, and then decide to go get him. I drive back to the bench and help him into the car, putting the bags in the back seat. He thanks me, and I begin to drive to the highway by cutting through town. Almost immediately, he gets a phone call from his children, meaning he just opened his phone and put it to his face and started talking. He says some bullshit about how he'll be there soon, and that he knows they're hungry, and to have their coach call him so he can explain, and the icing and cherry on top, and that maybe tonight they will find something good to eat in the dumpster. I see his phone is on the home screen, and he isn't actually answering a call, and called it done. Immediately, I pull to the side of the road, next to my local government center, and say, "Look, man, I'm sorry about your situation, but I don't feel comfortable to drive you any further. There's a bus that can take you from here, and I wish you luck." But he isn't having it. He starts off with, "You promised me," which I did not, and "I've got children, yada yada yada." So I call him on his bullshit and say that I know he didn't receive a call because I saw his phone on the home screen the entire time. He begins getting aggressive and picks up his voice, going on about how I promised him, still didn't, and that I need to drive him to DC so he can get his car. Right now, I'm fucking terrified, and I yell at him to get the fuck out of my car, but he refused to get out, saying he won't until he's in the city. So I get out of the car, walk to the other side, and open the door with his shit in the back and throw it down on the sidewalk. He then gets out of the passenger seat, and this is when I find out the crutches are fake too, and runs to get his shit that is now strewn down the sidewalk, yelling obscenities the entire time and how he will kill me. I close the doors, and he turns back to me, looking like he's ready to fight. Fuck that. I run to the driver's seat and then rip on out of there. I drive back to the house I'm watching and immediately have a panic attack, and then call the non-emergency police to report this guy. I start to explain my situation to the woman on the other line. I was walking my dog by the hospital, blah blah blah. Then I see this man on crutches. She stopped me there and gave a perfect description of him. African American, 5'6", short hair, yellow eyes. I tell her yes, and she immediately goes, "Do not drive him." Well, fuck yeah, I can see why. Apparently he's a homeless man, and his MO is robbing people once they get him to DC. I tell her his location, and then she informs me that they're sending an officer to his location, and then thanked me. My dumbass self is coming down from a panic attack, and then I say, "Thank you for your service," and then hang up the phone. Looking back, I realized I fucked up, and I'm an absolute dumbass. If any piece of advice that I can offer in my sage wisdom, as so clearly as presented in the story above, do not be nice to anyone ever, or you might get robbed. So, to the homeless man that I drove today, let's not meet. Hello, my lovely friends. Before the video ends, I just wanted to say that I hope that you're having a good end of the year. I know that this time can be hard for some, but I hope that you're still having a good month. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I appreciate you. Stay safe and sweet dreams.